Surviving Humanity's Warfront. Part 1. Zektars. 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he stared at the medical scanner's results. The readings couldn't be correct. His chitinous claws clicked nervously against the metal examination table as he ran the scan for the 3rd time. The same impossible data appeared on his screen. The human lying unconscious before him should have been dead. Not just dead, completely obliterated. The energy readings from his body showed he had absorbed enough radiation to kill a Vorthak battlecruiser crew 10 times over. His left arm was missing, torn off at the shoulder by what appeared to be plasma cannon fire. 3 ribs were broken. His lung was punctured, and his blood loss should have sent him into irreversible shock hours ago. Yet somehow, this creature called Marcus Chen was still breathing. Zektar had been the chief medical officer aboard the research vessel. Contemplation of stars. For over 2 decades, he had treated injuries from dozens of species across the galaxy. He understood biology, physiology, and the universal limits that governed organic life. What he was seeing now violated every principle he had learned. The ship's communication system crackled to life. Medical Bay. This is Captain Vorthak. Status report on the human survivor. Zektar's primary mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. Captain, the readings are unlike anything in our medical databases. This human should not be alive. Explain. His cellular structure appears to be actively fighting the radiation damage. I'm observing accelerated healing at the molecular level. It's as if his body is treating massive trauma as a minor inconvenience. Zektar paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Captain, what exactly happened down on that planet? The line remained silent for several long moments. When Captain Vorthak finally spoke, his usually confident tone carried an edge of something Zektar had never heard before. Fear. Doctor, prepare a full isolation chamber, set security protocols to maximum, and Zektar, be very careful with that human. I'll be down to explain shortly. The communication ended, leaving Zektar alone with his patient and a growing sense of dread. He had studied the preliminary reports about the planet below. Kepler 442b had been designated a Class 7 death world by the Galactic Survey Corps. The surface temperature fluctuated between freezing and boiling. The atmosphere was filled with corrosive chemicals. Massive predators roamed the surface, and the very ground was radioactive from ancient nuclear conflicts. No known species could survive on such a world for more than a few minutes without extensive protective equipment. Yet the humans had not only survived there, they had been thriving. Building settlements, raising families, creating art and music in conditions that would instantly kill most galactic citizens. The medical bay doors hissed open and Captain Vorthak entered with 2 security guards. The captain's usually pristine blue scales looked dull, and his head crest was flattened against his skull in obvious distress. Doctor, Vorthak began, what I'm about to tell you is classified under Protocol 7. The information cannot leave this room. Zektar's antenna twitched nervously. Protocol 7 was reserved for existential threats to galactic civilization. Understood, Captain. 3 days ago, we received a distress signal from the human colony on Kepler 442b. Standard procedure would have been to ignore it. Death world colonies are considered expendable by most galactic standards. But the humans offered us something in exchange for evacuation assistance. Vorthak activated a holographic display showing technical schematics. Weapon technology, energy systems that could revolutionize our entire fleet. The mathematics alone were centuries ahead of our current understanding. Zektar studied the displayed equations. Even with his limited understanding of weapons technology, he could see the implications. These power outputs, they're impossible. The energy requirements alone would drain a star. That's what we thought too, until we saw them in action. Vorthak's scales shifted to a deeper shade of blue. a sign of extreme anxiety in his species. "Doctor, the humans weren't requesting evacuation because they were in danger from their environment. They were requesting evacuation because they were under attack." Attack? By whom? What species would be foolish enough to assault a death world? The hegemony! Zektar's four hearts seemed to stop beating simultaneously. The hegemony was the most powerful military force in known space. Their battle fleets had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade alone. They possessed weapons that could crack planets and defensive systems that had never been breached. The hegemony sent a full assault fleet, Vorthak continued. 12 dreadnoughts, 48 battle cruisers, and over 300 support vessels. They intended to strip mine the planet for rare minerals. The human colony was to be removed. How many humans were on the planet? Approximately 50,000. Men, women, children, farmers, artists, teachers. Ordinary civilians who had chosen to make their home on a world that would kill any of us in minutes. Zektar looked down at his unconscious patient. Marcus Chen appeared to be in his mid-20s by human standards. His remaining arm was scarred but muscular. His face, even unconscious and pale from blood loss, had a determined set to it. "What happened to the hegemony fleet, Captain?" Vorthak was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Gone! All of them! 12 dreadnoughts destroyed, 48 battle cruisers reduced to debris, 300 support vessels vaporized, over 2 million hegemony soldiers dead." That's impossible. 50,000 civilians against the most powerful military force in the galaxy? That's what I thought too, until I saw the battlefield footage. Vorthak activated another holographic display. The humans didn't fight like any species we've encountered before. They didn't use standard tactics or conventional weapons. They used their environment. The hologram showed the planet's surface during the battle. Zektar watched in growing horror as small groups of humans used the deadly conditions of their world as weapons. They lured hegemony forces into areas where toxic gas vents would suddenly activate. They used the planet's unstable geology to trigger massive avalanches that buried entire hegemony battalions. They turned the radioactive storms into weapons, somehow shielding themselves while directing the lethal energy at their enemies. But the most terrifying part, Vorthak continued, was how they fought when cornered. Watch this. The hologram focused on a single human defending what appeared to be a school. Hegemony soldiers in full battle armor were advancing on the building. The human, a middle-aged woman holding what looked like a primitive energy rifle, stepped out into the open. Zektar watched as plasma bolts that should have vaporized her seemed to pass harmlessly around her. She moved with impossible speed and precision, her weapon finding gaps in armor that shouldn't have existed. When her rifle ran out of power, she discarded it and picked up a piece of debris. The improvised weapon became as lethal in her hands as any military-grade equipment. She killed 18 hegemony soldiers in under 2 minutes, Vorthak said quietly. A school teacher, using rocks and metal scraps. How? We don't know. Our scientists have been analyzing the footage for 3 days. The humans seem to possess some kind of enhanced combat instinct. When threatened, especially when protecting others, they become something else entirely, something far more dangerous than we ever imagined. On the examination table, Marcus Chen stirred, his remaining hand clenched into a fist, and his breathing changed from the shallow gasps of the severely wounded to the steady rhythm of someone preparing for action. "Doctor," Vorthak said urgently, "the isolation chamber, now." But it was too late. Marcus Chen's eyes opened, and Zektar found himself looking into the gaze of a predator, not the simple hunger of a carnivore, but the calculating intelligence of something that had evolved to hunt other intelligent species. "Where am I?" Marcus asked, his voice calm despite his injuries. "You're safe," Zektar managed to say. "You're aboard a medical vessel. We rescued you from the battle. Marcus slowly sat up, ignoring the fact that movement should have been agonizing with his injuries. The colony? The children? They're safe, Vorthak said quickly. The hegemony fleet was defeated. Your people won. Something that might have been relief crossed Marcus's face, followed immediately by something much more concerning. Good. That means they can't come after you for helping us. What do you mean? Zektar asked. Marcus's eyes focused on the captain with unsettling intensity. You picked up survivors. That makes you a target. The hegemony doesn't forgive interference. He paused, seeming to process his surroundings for the first time. What species are you? Your ship design doesn't match anything in our databases. We're Vorthak, the captain said. Our people have been spacefaring for over 3,000 years. Spacefaring, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. That means you have interstellar communication capabilities. The hegemony will know about this rescue operation within days, if they don't already. The hegemony fleet was destroyed, Vorthak said. There were no survivors to report. Marcus actually laughed, though the sound was devoid of humor. You think that was their entire fleet? That was a scouting force. The hegemony has been expanding for decades. They have hundreds of fleets, thousands of worlds. What you saw was them testing our defenses. The medical bay fell silent, except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Zektar felt his understanding of the situation shifting in ways that made his carapace itch with anxiety. Testing? Vorthak asked. The hegemony doesn't make mistakes like that. They don't send overwhelming force against an unknown enemy without gathering intelligence first. Those 2 million soldiers you mentioned, they died to provide data. Combat performance, weapon effectiveness, tactical responses, all of it recorded and transmitted back to their command structure. Marcus swung his legs off the examination table, moving with careful precision. They know exactly what we're capable of now, and more importantly, they know that other species are willing to help us. What does that mean for us? Zektar found himself asking. Marcus looked directly at him, and Zektar saw something in those human eyes that chilled him to his core. It wasn't cruelty or malice. It was something far worse, compassion mixed with absolute certainty about what was coming. It means you're at war now, Marcus said quietly, whether you want to be or not. The hegemony will see your rescue operation as an act of aggression. They'll come for your home world, your colonies, your people. They'll try to make an example of you to discourage other species from helping humans in the future. We can surrender, Captain Vorthak said quickly. Explain that it was a humanitarian mission. The Galactic Council has protocols. The Galactic Council? Marcus interrupted. What's that? As Vorthak explained the council structure, the treaties and protocols that had maintained peace between species for centuries, Zektar watched Marcus's expression grow increasingly grim. So you have a governing body that prevents wars between member species? Marcus summarized. And the hegemony operates outside this council? They were expelled 50 years ago for aggressive expansion, Vorthak admitted. But they've respected the boundaries. They only attack unaffiliated worlds. Like Earth, Yes. Unaffiliated worlds are considered fair game under galactic law. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. Captain Doctor, I need you to understand something about my species. We have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. For 50 years, your Galactic Council has done nothing while the hegemony murdered billions of innocent people. You've created a system where genocide is legal as long as the victims aren't part of your club. It's not that simple, Vorthak began. It is exactly that simple, Marcus cut him off. And now you're about to learn what happens when you let evil grow unchecked for 50 years. The hegemony isn't just coming for you because you helped us. They're coming because they're finally strong enough to challenge the entire Galactic Council. Marcus stood slowly, his remaining hand gripping the examination table for support. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engines. Zektar realized that everything he thought he knew about galactic politics, about warfare, about the nature of civilization itself, was about to change forever. And at the center of it all stood a single human, wounded and alone, who somehow seemed more dangerous than entire fleets of warships. Surviving Humanity's Warfront. Part 2. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 days after Marcus Chen's revelation aboard the Contemplation of Stars. Zektar found himself standing in the massive amphitheater on Nexus Prime, the Council's homeworld, surrounded by representatives from 43 different species. His presence as a medical witness had been requested by Captain Vorthok, though Zektar suspected the real reason was that no one wanted to face the implications of Marcus's warnings alone. The amphitheater buzzed with nervous energy. Translucent beings from crystalline floated near the ceiling, their forms pulsing with agitated light patterns. The massive Gorathi delegates sat in reinforced sections, their stone-like hides scraping against specially designed seating. Delicate Etherians clustered together, their gossamer wings trembling with anxiety. At the center of it all, Marcus Chen stood in the witness circle. The human had refused medical treatment beyond basic wound care. His missing arm remained a stark reminder of the battle on Kepler 442b, and Zektar could see the pain medication wasn't fully masking his discomfort. Yet Marcus stood with perfect posture, his single remaining hand clasped behind his back in a military stance. Chancellor Veltar of the Nexari called the session to order. Her forearms gestured gracefully as her melodic voice filled the amphitheater through the translation matrix. We are gathered to address claims of an imminent hegemony threat to council space. The witness will present evidence of this alleged danger. Marcus stepped forward. Honored delegates, my name is Marcus Chen, formerly Lieutenant Colonel in the Terran Colonial Defense Force. I commanded the 3rd Battalion during the defense of Kepler 442b against hegemony forces. A ripple of surprise ran through the amphitheater. Lieutenant Colonel, Zektar realized that this human he had treated as a wounded civilian was actually a military officer. More unsettling, he was relatively junior in rank to have commanded an entire battalion in such a crucial battle. The attack on our colony was a probe, Marcus continued. The hegemony sent approximately 2 million soldiers to test our defensive capabilities. This force was designed to fail. Council member Thexala of the Quariani raised a crystalline appendage. You claim this force was meant to be defeated? That seems inefficient. On the contrary, it was extremely efficient. The hegemony learned several critical pieces of information. First, they confirmed that humans can survive and fight effectively in conditions lethal to most galactic species. Second, they observed our combat tactics and technological capabilities. Third, and most importantly, they discovered that council species are willing to provide humanitarian aid to human colonies. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. That last point is what has escalated this from a simple extermination campaign to a galactic crisis. Chancellor Veltar's primary eyes focused on Marcus, while her secondary eyes scanned the gathered delegates. Explain this escalation. The hegemony's expansion strategy relies on isolation. They attack unaffiliated worlds because they know the Council will not intervene. This policy has allowed them to grow unchecked for 5 decades. But the moment Council species began rescuing human survivors, that strategy became obsolete. Marcus gestured toward the Vorthak delegation, where Captain Vorthak sat with obvious discomfort. Captain Vorthak's rescue operation wasn't just an act of compassion. In hegemony doctrine, it was a declaration of war. The amphitheater erupted into noise as representatives began speaking simultaneously in dozens of languages. The translation matrix struggled to keep up, creating a cacophony of overlapping voices expressing shock, denial, and fear. "Order!" Chancellor Veltar commanded, her melodic voice cutting through the chaos. "The witness will continue." Marcus waited for silence before speaking again. "I've spent the last 3 days studying your historical records. The hegemony has been systematically targeting the Outer Rim territories for 50 years. Unaffiliated worlds that might have been future council members. Species that might have brought valuable resources or knowledge to your alliance. They've been weakening the galaxy's potential for growth while building their own strength." "That's a serious accusation," interjected Council Member Dextor of the Phydians. His insectoid features showed clear agitation. "Do you have evidence of such a coordinated strategy?" Marcus nodded to Zektar, who reluctantly activated a holographic projector. The display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with different colored markers indicating various territorial claims. "This is Council space 50 years ago," Marcus said as the display shifted to historical data. "Note the number of independent colonies and unaffiliated species in the Outer Rim." The map showed scattered points of light throughout the galaxy's edge regions, representing hundreds of non-council civilizations. "This is the same region today." The display shifted to current data. The Outer Rim was almost completely dark, with only a few isolated points of light remaining. "The hegemony didn't just conquer these worlds," Marcus continued. "They eliminated them entirely. Genocide on a scale that your records don't even track, because it happened outside council space." Council member Yilthra of the Zephyrians stood, her translucent form shimmering with emotion. "Even if this is accurate, what does it have to do with the current situation?" "Everything," Marcus replied. "The hegemony has spent 50 years building a military force specifically designed to destroy the Galactic Council. They've tested their weapons against dozens of species. They've studied your defensive capabilities through captured Council technology from trade ships. They know your fleet positions, your supply lines, your political divisions." "You're suggesting a conspiracy spanning decades," Chancellor Veltar said carefully. "I'm stating a fact. The attack on human colonies was the final phase of their preparation. They needed to test their forces against the most dangerous possible enemy before launching their main assault. And humans are this most dangerous enemy?" The question came from Council Member Brix of the Stormkin, his electrical field crackling with skepticism. Marcus's expression grew grim. "Yes." "Based on what evidence?" "Based on evolution." Zektar found himself leaning forward despite his anxiety. He had been wondering about this very question since treating Marcus. "Most species in this galaxy evolved on worlds your survey teams classify as paradise or garden worlds," Marcus continued. "Stable climates, abundant resources, minimal environmental threats. Your evolution was guided by cooperation and resource management." The human gestured toward Earth's position on the star map. "Humans evolved on a Class 7 death world. For 3 million years, everything on our planet was trying to kill us. The climate, the wildlife, the geology, other human tribes. We developed intelligence not to build civilizations, but to wage war." "That's a disturbing perspective," Council Member Thexla observed. "It's reality. When your ancestors faced scarcity, they learned to share resources and work together. When my ancestors faced scarcity, they learned to take resources from their enemies and eliminate competition. Both are survival strategies. Both are equally valid." Marcus activated another holographic display showing combat footage from Kepler 442b. "The difference is that cooperation makes you vulnerable to creatures like us. You assume other species will follow rules, honor agreements, fight with restraint. We assume other species will do whatever it takes to survive." The footage showed human defenders using tactics that made Zektar's carapace itch with discomfort. Children as young as 12 operating heavy weapons with deadly precision. Elderly humans using their own bodies as living bombs to destroy hegemony equipment. Wounded fighters continuing to fight long after injuries that would incapacitate any council species. "This is barbaric," whispered Council Member Felnara of the Pacifist Alliance. "This is effective," Marcus corrected. "The hegemony has conquered hundreds of worlds using overwhelming force and terror tactics. They've never faced an enemy that responds to overwhelming force with overwhelming violence." "Are you saying humans are superior fighters?" asked Council Member Dextor. "No, I'm saying we're the only species the hegemony fears, and that fear is what's driving their timeline." Marcus deactivated the combat footage and faced the Chancellor directly. The original hegemony plan was probably to spend another decade building their forces before challenging the Council. But the discovery that humans exist, and that Council species are willing to help us, has accelerated their schedule. "How can you possibly know their intentions?" Chancellor Veltar asked. "Because I would make the same tactical decision. The longer they wait, the more likely it becomes that humans and Council species will form formal alliances. The hegemony's only advantage is that you don't understand what you're facing. Once you do, once you start adapting their methods to your technology and resources, they lose their strategic superiority." The amphitheater fell silent as the implications sank in. Zektar could see the fear in the faces around him. These were species that had maintained peace for centuries through negotiation and compromise. The idea of the total war Marcus was describing was beyond their comprehension. "What do you recommend?" Chancellor Veltar finally asked. "Immediate mobilization, every council fleet, every defensive installation, every available resource. The hegemony will attack within days, not weeks." "That seems excessive," Council Member Brix protested. "Perhaps diplomatic contact—" "There will be no diplomacy," Marcus interrupted. "The hegemony doesn't negotiate with species they intend to exterminate. And after 50 years of genocide, they can't afford to leave any witnesses. So we fight. You fight, or you die. There are no other options." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Captain Vorthak rising from his seat in the observer section. "If I may address the Council." Chancellor Veltar nodded permission. 3 days ago, my ship detected massive energy signatures at the edge of hegemony space. Long-range sensors showed fleet movements on a scale we've never recorded before. Thousands of ships, all heading toward the inner rim. The amphitheater exploded into chaos as representatives began shouting questions and demands simultaneously. The translation matrix overloaded, creating a feedback loop that forced everyone to fall silent. When order was restored, Marcus stepped forward again. "How long until they reach Council space?" Captain Vorthak consulted his datapad. "At current speed, 18 hours. "Then you have 17 hours to prepare," Marcus said simply. "I suggest you use them wisely." Chancellor Veltar's 4 arms gestured frantically as she processed the timeline. "What can we possibly accomplish in 17 hours? "You can stop thinking like politicians and start thinking like survivors," Marcus replied. "The hegemony expects you to follow your standard procedures. Committee meetings, subcommittee reviews, diplomatic protocols. They're counting on your bureaucratic processes to delay effective response until it's too late. What do you suggest instead?" Marcus's single remaining hand clenched into a fist. "Give me command of your fleets." The suggestion was so shocking that for a moment no one responded at all. "You're asking us to place our entire military under the command of an alien species," Council Member Thexla said slowly. "I'm asking you to place your military under the command of someone who understands war," Marcus corrected. "Your fleet commanders are excellent at maintaining peace and conducting defensive operations, but they've never faced an enemy committed to total extermination. And you have? Every day of my life. Humans don't have peaceful worlds. We don't have species that practice nonviolence. Every human colony is a potential battlefield. Every human child learns basic combat skills before they learn to read. We are what the hegemony created us to be." Marcus paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. "The question is whether you're willing to become what you need to be in order to survive." Zektar watched the faces around him as the delegates grappled with Marcus's proposal. He could see the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that somehow this nightmare could be resolved through familiar diplomatic channels. But he could also see something else beginning to emerge, a hardening of expressions, a shift in posture, a subtle change in the energy of the amphitheater. These species had maintained their civilization for thousands of years. They hadn't survived by being weak. They just had never been forced to remember how strong they could be. "The Council will vote," Chancellor Veltar announced. "All in favor of granting emergency command authority to the human representative?" The voting process took only minutes. When the final tally was announced, Marcus Chen had been granted supreme command of all Council military forces by a margin of 37-6. As the session disbanded and representatives hurried to contact their home fleets, Zektar approached Marcus. The human was standing alone in the witness circle, staring up at the star map display. "Do you really think we can win?" Zektar asked. Marcus turned to look at him, and Zektar saw something in those human eyes he hadn't noticed before. Not just the predatory intelligence, not just the tactical calculation, but something else. Something that might have been hope. "Doctor," Marcus said quietly, "for the first time in 50 years, the galaxy is going to fight back. The hegemony has no idea what they've awakened." Above them, the star map continued to display the approaching enemy fleet. Thousands of red markers moving inexorably toward the heart of civilized space. But for the first time since this crisis began, Zektar found himself believing they might survive. The galaxy was about to learn what humans meant by total war, and perhaps more importantly, it was about to discover what other species could become when they stopped fighting like civilized beings and started fighting like survivors. Outside the medical bay's viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the cosmic shift that was about to reshape the galaxy. But Zektar had the unsettling feeling the arc surviving humanity's Warfront. Part 3. The Battle of Nexus Prime began exactly as Marcus Chen had predicted. 16 hours after the emergency council session, hegemony forces dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system with overwhelming superiority. 3,000 warships, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to swift attack cruisers, formed an advancing wall of destruction that should have swept away any organized resistance within hours. Zektar watched from the command center of the orbital defense platform, Shield of Wisdom, his 4 eyes tracking multiple displays showing the enemy fleet's approach. Beside him, Marcus stood at the central command console, his remaining hand dancing across holographic controls with inhuman speed and precision. "All Council fleets report ready," Captain Vorthak announced from his position at the communications station. 843 vessels in defensive formation. The numbers were stark. 3,000 enemy ships against less than 900 defenders. By every tactical analysis in the Galactic Council's military database, the coming battle would result in total annihilation of Council forces within 30 minutes. But Marcus had spent the last 16 hours changing everything about how those ships would fight. "Phase 1 initiation in 60 seconds, Marcus announced calmly. "All vessels confirm understanding of new protocols." Zektar marveled at what the human had accomplished in such a short time. Traditional Council fleet doctrine emphasized formations, coordinated maneuvers, and overwhelming firepower applied to specific targets. Ships stayed together, commanders communicated extensively before making tactical decisions, and battles were fought with careful precision. Marcus had thrown out 5,000 years of military tradition and replaced it with something the hegemony had never encountered: organized chaos. 30 seconds to contact, Captain Vorthak reported. Hegemony Fleet is maintaining standard attack formation. On the main display, the enemy ships approached in perfect order. Massive capital ships in the center, surrounded by defensive screens of smaller vessels, all moving with the mechanical precision that had conquered hundreds of worlds. 10 seconds. Marcus's voice carried across the command center with absolute authority. Execute Phoenix Protocol. What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as the moment modern space warfare changed forever. Instead of meeting the hegemony charge with their own organized formations, the Council fleet exploded outward like shrapnel from a broken shell. Individual ships and small squadrons scattered in seemingly random directions, each following independent flight paths that appeared to make no tactical sense. The hegemony commanders, trained in conventional warfare, responded exactly as Marcus had anticipated. They tried to maintain formation while pursuing multiple targets simultaneously. Their massive dreadnoughts, designed to deliver overwhelming firepower against concentrated enemy positions, found themselves firing at individual ships that were already moving to new positions by the time the energy beams reached their previous locations. Zephyrian Squadron 7 reporting successful strike on hegemony cruiser Dominion, came the first victory report. Target destroyed, squadron moving to secondary position. Gorathi Heavy Assault Team has breached the enemy screen, reported another voice. Engaging hegemony battleships at close range. Zektar watched in amazement as the tactical display showed the impossible happening. The smaller council ships, operating independently and unpredictably, were actually damaging the much larger enemy fleet. Not through superior firepower, but through confusion and misdirection. "How is this working?" he asked Marcus. "Simple psychology," Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving the tactical displays. "The hegemony has won every battle for 50 years by applying overwhelming force to organized resistance. Their entire tactical doctrine assumes enemy fleets will fight back using conventional strategies." On the main screen, a group of crystalline ships phased through solid matter to appear inside the hegemony formation, their exotic weaponry disrupting enemy shields from within. Meanwhile, Stormkin vessels used their electrical manipulation abilities to overload enemy sensors, creating blind spots that other council ships exploited with devastating effect. "But this isn't just random chaos," Zektar observed as he began to see patterns in the apparent disorder. "Exactly. Every ship has specific objectives and predetermined fallback positions. We're fighting like a single organism with multiple independent parts, each adapting to local conditions while serving the overall strategy." Marcus activated a communication channel. Phase 2 initiation. All units confirm Predator protocols are active. The battle shifted again as council ships began implementing tactics that would have been unthinkable under traditional command structures. Damaged vessels, instead of retreating for repairs, began ramming attacks against enemy capital ships. Small fighter squadrons, outnumbered and outgunned, started kamikaze runs against critical enemy systems. "This is insane," Captain Vorthak muttered. "We're throwing away ships and crews." "We're trading resources for strategic advantage," Marcus corrected. "The hegemony expects us to preserve our forces because that's how civilized species fight wars. They're not prepared for an enemy willing to sacrifice anything to achieve victory." A new voice came over the communications system. "This is Admiral Kethra of the Etherian Fleet. Human Commander, my ships are too fragile for direct assault. How do we contribute to this madness?" Marcus smiled, and Zektar was disturbed to realize it was the first genuine expression of pleasure he had seen from the human. "Admiral, your ships may be fragile, but they're also the fastest in the galaxy. I have a special mission for you." Within minutes, the Etherian vessels were racing past the main battle at speeds that strained their delicate structures. Their destination became clear as they approached the rear of the hegemony formation, the massive command ships that were coordinating the enemy fleet. "No," Captain Vorthak breathed. The Etherians can't possibly penetrate those defenses. They don't need to penetrate them, Marcus replied. They just need to get close enough. The Etherian ships reached the edge of the Hegemony Command Group and suddenly dispersed into clouds of glittering particles. For a moment, Zektar thought they had been destroyed. Then he realized what was happening. They're using their phase shift abilities as weapons, he said in wonder. The Etherian vessels had partially dematerialized, allowing them to pass through the outer hulls of the enemy command ships. Once inside, they rematerialized just long enough to release their weapon payloads directly into critical systems, then phased out again before defensive systems could respond. The effect was immediate and devastating. 3 massive Hegemony command ships went dark simultaneously as their primary systems failed. Without central coordination, entire sections of the enemy fleet began operating at reduced efficiency. Phase 3, Marcus announced. All units, begin convergence protocol. The chaotic dance of individual council ships suddenly took on new purpose as they began flowing back together into larger formations. But these weren't the traditional rigid structures of conventional fleet doctrine. Instead, they formed dynamic, adaptive groups that could merge and separate as tactical conditions changed. More importantly, Marcus had positioned these reformed groups to take advantage of the confusion and disarray in the enemy fleet. Hegemony ships that had been pursuing scattered targets found themselves surrounded by converging council forces attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Enemy fleet cohesion is breaking down, reported Captain Vorthak with barely contained excitement. Multiple Hegemony units are attempting to retreat. Negative, Marcus said sharply. No enemy vessels leave this system. Phase 4 activation, scorched earth protocols. The final phase of the battle was the most brutal. Council ships that had expended their primary armaments began using their ships themselves as weapons. Damaged vessels rammed enemy cruisers. Transport ships loaded with explosives targeted enemy supply lines. Even civilian vessels from Nexus Prime joined the assault, their crews using industrial equipment and mining tools to devastating effect. But the most terrifying sight was watching the other Council species adapt Marcus's human approach to warfare. The normally peaceful Nexari began targeting enemy life support systems specifically. The philosophical Quariani used their crystalline forms to slice through enemy hulls like living blades. Even the pacifist Zephyrians started using their transparency abilities to conduct assassination missions against enemy commanders. They're learning, Zektar realized with a mixture of awe and horror. They're becoming like humans. No, Marcus corrected quietly. They're becoming themselves. Every species in this galaxy has the capacity for violence. They just needed permission to use it. The Hegemony fleet, despite its numerical superiority and advanced weaponry, had been designed to fight traditional enemies using predictable tactics. They had no contingency plans for facing an opponent that had abandoned every convention of civilized warfare. As the battle entered its 4th hour, the impossible became reality. The 3,000-ship Hegemony invasion fleet was not just being defeated, it was being systematically annihilated. Enemy flagship Eternal Conquest is attempting to withdraw, Captain Vorthak reported. Pursue and destroy, Marcus ordered without hesitation. No survivors, no witnesses, no one returns to Hegemony space with intelligence about our capabilities. The final Hegemony ship was destroyed 6 hours after the battle began. The space around Nexus Prime was filled with debris and the slowly cooling wreckage of what had been the most powerful invasion fleet in galactic history. But as Zektar looked around the command center, he realized the true cost of their victory. The Council species who had entered this battle as civilized, peaceful beings had emerged as something fundamentally different. The expressions on their faces, the way they carried themselves, the casual way they discussed the complete extermination of their enemies. They had been changed by Marcus's methods. Is this what it means to be human? Zektar asked. To become something terrible in order to survive. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display that showed their total victory. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of centuries. Doctor, you've misunderstood something fundamental about my species. We didn't become terrible to survive. We became terrible because we survived. Every species in this galaxy had the same potential for violence that humans possess. The only difference is that our world never gave us the luxury of forgetting how to use it. He gestured toward the crew around them, Vorthak, Nexari, Zephyrians, all working together with deadly efficiency that would have been impossible days earlier. Your people aren't becoming human. They're remembering what they were before they had the luxury of peace. The hegemony made a critical error in their intelligence gathering. They assumed that peaceful species were weak species. They confused civilization with softness. Marcus activated a communication channel to address all remaining council forces. All vessels, prepare for immediate departure. We have 18 hours to reach the hegemony home system before their backup fleets can organize a response. We're invading their space? Captain Vorthak asked in shock. We're finishing what they started, Marcus corrected. The hegemony has spent 50 years teaching the galaxy that strength means the right to exterminate anyone weaker than yourself. Today, they're going to learn what happens when someone stronger comes for them. As the victorious council fleet prepared to depart Nexus Prime, Zektar found himself contemplating the cosmic shift that had just occurred. The galaxy's balance of power hadn't just changed, it had been completely inverted. The predator species that had terrorized the Outer Rim for half a century was about to become prey. But more than that, the Galactic Council itself had been transformed. They were no longer a loose alliance of peaceful species focused on trade and diplomacy. They had become something new, something that had never existed before in galactic history. They had become a military alliance capable of total war, led by a species that understood violence at the molecular level and guided by principles that valued survival above all other considerations. 3 days later, the hegemony homeworld surrendered unconditionally after their entire home defense fleet was destroyed in less than 2 hours. The empire that had dominated the Outer Rim for 50 years collapsed within a week as member species either surrendered immediately or were systematically eliminated by council forces that showed no mercy and took no prisoners. Zektar stood in the medical bay of the flagship New Dawn, treating wounded council personnel who bore their injuries with a pride that would have been alien to them weeks earlier. The scars they carried weren't just marks of battle, they were proof of transformation. Marcus entered the medical bay, his missing arm still a stark reminder of where this journey had begun. How are they adapting to their new reality? He asked. Better than expected, Zektar replied honestly. Some are troubled by how easily they embraced violence. Others seem to find it liberating. But all of them understand that there's no going back. There never was, Marcus said simply. The moment the hegemony decided to target human colonies, this outcome became inevitable. The only variable was how much of the galaxy would survive the transition. And now? Marcus walked to the medical bay's viewport, looking out at the stars that now belonged to a very different galaxy than the one that had existed a week earlier. Now your people have learned the most important lesson in the universe, he said, that peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is what happens when everyone understands the consequences of starting a war they cannot finish. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance. But now they danced over a galaxy where the strong protected the weak, where genocide was answered with extinction, and where humanity's terrifying gift for warfare served as the foundation for a peace more secure than any that had come before. The age of predators was over. The age of guardians had begun. Even the stars might not be safe from what was coming.